Morning, everyone. Hello. So I thought I would talk again about the the latest blue on blue action. So some of you may be aware um, that last week Rishi Sunak attempted to, should we say, blackmail Boris Johnson. So Boris Johnson is he's pretending he wants to hand over a load of information to the COVID inquiry to Baroness Hallett, KC. And Rishi Sunak says, no, you can't do that. And actually, he can't do that. He can't directly hand over information because it's government information. It belongs to the government. And in theory, some of it might need redacted, like genuinely redacting. So Rishi Sunak said, because Boris Johnson obviously doesn't care about the rules, Rishi Sunak said, look, Boris, mate, not that you're my mate anymore. If you don't start behaving yourself, I'm going to take away all your funding for your expensive lawyers, right? You can pay for it yourself. And so what's happened now? I don't know whether anyone knows Peter Cruddas or Lord Shoreditch. He was one of the people, one of Boris Johnson's mates. He's one of those people that Boris Johnson made a lord in return for a swag bag, basically. And he's been a big supporter of Boris Johnson. He's behind, for example, the Conservative Democratic Organisation, which is like the Boris Johnson cult. And what he's said this week is, when the reports came through that Rishi Sunak this weekend was threatening the legal fees, Cruddas came out and says to Boris Johnson, he did it all on Twitter and everything, don't you worry about that, Boris. Don't you worry. I will cover your legal fees. Actually, he's not even said he will cover them. He said he will raise the money. He's now saying he could raise the money needed to pay for those legal fees in half a day, right? So basically, and this has been reported as well. So this has been reported in the Express. It's reported in the Telegraph. But also, because you say Peter Cruddas, now he's sort of a conservative, but he's not on the Conservative Party side. But I'll tell you what I found remarkable, and hence the sort of title of this video, that the Conservative Home website supported this. Not just reported on it, supported it. Conservative Home saying to Peter Cruddas, this is great news, go for it. Now, for those who don't know, Conservative Home is basically like Labour List. So there's Labour List, which is separate to the Labour Party, but it puts up a lot of articles about what's going on in the Labour Party. It does interviews and things like that. Conservative Home does the same thing for the Conservative Party. So really, it's a Conservative Party support group. And yet they are supporting this move to have Boris Johnson's legal fees paid, not to protect Boris Johnson, but to stop Rishi Sunak from having any control over the documents. And let's think about what this means as well. So what is Boris Johnson offering to hand over to the inquiry without going through the Cabinet Office first? We know it's not what the inquiry is asking for, because it's only going to be information. It's only going to be for documents from May 2021, which is after the period that the inquiry is mostly interested, which is in 2020 and the first bit of 2021. So what is Boris Johnson actually offering to hand over? It could be nothing at all. It could be that it's all just completely useless to the inquiry, and they'll look at it and go, yeah, none of this is any use to us. In which case you have to ask yourself, why is Rishi Sunak fighting it then? Why is he making this threat? Particularly now that that threat is null and void. If that was a threat at all, it now doesn't exist, because Boris Johnson's biggest financial backer, really, I suppose, or certainly his most vocal of the very wealthy backers he has basically said he will cover Johnson's legal fees. So the threat has now been obliterated. Why would Sunak have made that threat if he's not worried about what comes forward? Is it the principle? Is it the idea that even if he thinks what Boris Johnson will hand over in the first place is fine, that it's like sets a precedent for others to do the same thing who might have more damaging information? Or is it something that Boris Johnson thinks doesn't do him any harm, because obviously he's not going to hand over anything that harms him, but incriminates Rishi Sunak? In which case I would find that odd, because Boris Johnson was still Prime Minister at the time. So how can he have anything that incriminates Rishi Sunak without incriminating himself? Because apart from it, he can't claim he didn't know about it because he has the information. If he's able to hand it over, it means he has the information. You know, it's a bit like there's a similar thing. Oh, Daily Blase is there. There's a similar thing. I don't know whether anyone read this article in the Mail on Sunday. Not the Dan Hodges one. There was another one that basically is trying to make the claim that the reason Sunak wants to block this information coming from Johnson is because it reveals the plot to bring down Johnson. That's what they're doing. Reveals this plot to bring down Boris Johnson. Now, this is ridiculous for two reasons. First of all, Boris Johnson's talking about handing it over to the inquiry, right? The inquiry don't publish everything that's handed over to them. They decide what needs to be brought into the public. The inquiry isn't interested in blue on blue, Tory skullduggery, cloak and dagger stuff. They're not interested in their petty, regicides. So they won't make it public. But the second thing is, so if Boris Johnson was in possession of the secret plot to topple him, why did it work? I mean, how bad is that? Boris Johnson had the details of this secret plot to topple him, and it worked. That'd be embarrassing, that. I'd be embarrassed if I was brought down by a secret plot that I had advance notice of. Makes no sense at all. Absolutely no sense. Right, catch up with some comments, and we'll carry on here. Blue on blue action. Johnson Doris had their fun at last then. No, don't be disgusting. People may be still having breakfast. Does no one in government know how WhatsApp works? I suspect they know exactly how WhatsApp works because they have advisors who will tell them. They're just hoping that members of the public don't know how WhatsApp works. And also, let's be honest, we're not even talking about members of the public. I'm going to stereotype again. I don't wish to stereotype. But should we just say as a generalization, if we consider who the Tories are mostly trying to persuade, it's elderly people. And it's very probable that I'm sure a lot of elderly people will use WhatsApp to keep in contact with their families and so on, but they don't necessarily change their phones very often. I can't imagine most people don't. I don't change my phone very often. So if you don't change your phone very often, you don't necessarily understand to what extent you can quite easily get WhatsApp messages. You might think to yourself, oh, well, if your phone's permanently turned off, then you don't. I only probably know anything about WhatsApp because I don't like using my phone. So I use the app on my computer to link with my phone. So I use WhatsApp on my computer, mostly for sending my partner my Wordle thing of the day, but various other things as well. So, and that's the only reason I know that you could easily extract the data onto another device, really. So I think that's all they're trying to do. They're just trying to hide, get the public who don't understand how it works. And of course, because the media don't call the government out on this or Boris Johnson. What are the odds on the crazy side of the party reckoning they could replace Sunak and go for a 25 election, the latest possible moment? The economy is back to trust levels and the boats not stopped. I'll tell you what is interesting. So my first video of today is going to be on, you've mentioned the boats thing because that's one of the 5 pledges. The latest polling from Ipsos, they don't produce polling very often, but when they do, it's worth a look at, shows, so for all of the 5 pledges, Rishi Sunak's 5 pledges, halving inflation, growing the economy, reducing debt, national debt, reducing NHS waiting lists, and introducing legislation to stop the boats. As far as the public are concerned, the Conservatives are making a right arse of all of them. But what was really spectacular is they all think Keir Starmer's Labour would do better on all of them. And bear in mind, although Sunak calls these the public's priorities, they're not. They're his. They're his PR stunt. And Labour is beating him on his own PR stunt. Absolutely spectacular. But in terms of the crazy side, so let's have a review of the sort of the swivel-eyed loons, as a former Conservative Party chair used to call them before they took over the party. The swivel-eyed loons, what's their plan? Their first plan was to hope that the local elections went really badly, which they did, and that destabilized Sunak's position. Now, it didn't do that, partly possibly because of the Windsor Agreement, the Windsor Framework Agreement, that allowed a lot of MPs to go, okay, well, Sunak is capable of achieving things. But either way, their first attempt was going to be just after the local elections. They did go badly. They went worse than expected. And yet Sunak wasn't weakened by it. So that bit's failed. The next plan, obviously, there's going to be a real campaign to undermine him over the summer. The next opportunity will be end of October. At the end of October, Rishi Sunak will have been Tory leader for 1 year, which means that the normal rules for confidence votes come online, which means if 15% of Tory MPs have a letter of no confidence into the 1922 committee, it will trigger a confidence vote. Now, I don't think there's enough Tory MPs want to do that, but that is their next gambit. They may try to cause trouble at the Tory party conference as well, but I'm not sure they will do. But there we go. How can Labour do worse? That would be crazy. Well, but these pledges were ones that Rishi Sunak chose. He chose them. The public didn't choose them. There was no public consultation. He chose them, and he chose them based on the idea that they would be ones that he could achieve. They sound like they sort of hit public priorities. Like if I give you an example, halving inflation. Is halving inflation what the public want? You ask an average member of the public, do you approve of the government's move to halve inflation? You think, well, yeah, because that's inflation lowers better. But does that really get to there? Because what's the public's priority? The public's priority is, why does inflation matter? Because it means things cost more and you can't afford, you have to cut back because you can't afford as much. Well, if inflation halves, that's still above the rate at which most people's income's going up. So things are still costing you more than they did, relative terms. What you actually want is inflation to be lower than your pay increase. If you're going to get a 3% pay increase, you want inflation to be below 3%. Is inflation going to be below 3%? No. Is your income increase going to be higher than inflation? Probably not. Some people in the private sector may be. Probably in the public sector, not a chance. Sarah's saying that, yeah, if a woman's assaulted and sexually assaulted goes to the police, her phone has to be handed over to see if she's a liar or whatever. Why should ministers actually responsible for COVID deaths not have to do it? Well, exactly. This is it, isn't it? And in fact, we may find they do have to hand it over. We may find that the inquiry has the legal right not only to get the information from the Cabinet Office, but to order Boris Johnson to surrender his phone, because he claims he still has the physical phone. I don't know why he didn't drop it into the sea, quite frankly. I don't know why he didn't go on a fishing boat and say, oh, I'm here to support the brave fishermen of Britain. I'm going to go on a trawler for a little excursion. And I'm gonna do a selfie of myself from the prow of the boat. Oh, I've dropped my phone. Oh dear, what's happened? I don't know why he hasn't done that. Why he hasn't done a Rebecca Vardy? But anyway, he hasn't. So he still says he's got the phone. We may find that the inquiry can get the High Court and ultimately the Supreme Court, because there's probably going to be an appeal. And I also gather they are going to that hearing is going to be quite soon. We're not going to be waiting months for this thing. This is going to happen this month, I gather. So what I'm saying is Sunak will need a barnstorming conference speech. Shame Robo Sunak has no ability to project a personality. No, indeed, he hasn't. Obviously, at the Conservative Party conference, he will have a supportive audience, though. So the other thing I'll note is, now I've not seen this widely reported, so this could just be someone making something up or wild speculation. But I saw a suggestion, and that's all it is. I'll not put it any stronger than that. I saw a suggestion that when Parliament goes for its summer recess, it might not come back. I mean, I don't mean forever, but it might not come back until after the conference season. What normally happens is MPs go off on summer recess for about 6 weeks. Then they come back for just a few weeks, like 3 weeks, usually. Then the conference season starts. So various political parties have their big annual conference, and Parliament isn't sitting at that time because to avoid MPs having, although I would say in a state of emergency they should still carry on sitting, but it's to avoid MPs having to split themselves between the conference and Parliament. And also, obviously, you can't have votes going on if a load of MPs are going to be at there, because all the party conferences at different times. So they come back for a few weeks, then they go away for another few weeks to have the conferences, and then they come back up till Christmas, sort of. So the suggestion is that Rishi Sunak will not recall Parliament until mid-October. So in other words, when it goes off for recess, it'll go off for 3 months. 3 months without any Parliament. Absolutely insane. Could Sunak try to bring his rebels into line by threatening a general election? If he thinks he's got a lot of rebels, so here's the way it could play out. Let's say there's enough. We know that the majority of Tory MPs do not want to change leader now, even if they're disappointed with the local election results and they don't like their chances, and every poll they see is a disaster. They think it would be, and they're right as well, by the way, but it doesn't matter what is right and wrong. What matters is what they think. They think that it would be even worse to try and change leader again, especially to go back to Boris Johnson. So a majority support Rishi Sunak, which means that Rishi Sunak cannot be forced out. However, it only takes about 40 Tory MPs to stop him governing, because they can just block his legislation. Now, again, it's doubtful that there are that many Tory MPs who would do that, because that would be seen as very disloyal to their party. I mean, bear in mind, rebels, even in the extreme Labour rebels, would not do that. So I don't think that's credible, but in theory they could. Now, in that very hypothetical situation, Rishi Sunak can't get any legislation through because they're blocking everything. They're basically saying, step down or we're just going to block everything. He refuses to step down. Most of his MPs don't want him to step down, but he can't govern. In that situation, yes, you go for a general election, because otherwise you're just going to drain credibility away. So that is the situation under which we could have a very early snap general election, where it's the situation that Sunak is prevented from governing, but the majority of his MPs do not want to back anyone else. Let's have a look. This is about yesterday's thing with the Home Office. Yvette Cooper called a point of order to allow Cruella to correct herself on migrant numbers, and the Deputy Speaker basically protected Cruella. I think you need to understand that sometimes the Speaker and Deputy Speakers get a load of grief over things that they can't really change. They're not a judge. They can't force someone to say a thing or to even answer a question properly or anything like that. They're literally there just to tell people, just to say, you can speak now, and things like that. And to set out the rules of the House. The rules of the House are very vague, really, apart from the fact you're not allowed to call a liar a liar. Do I mean Sunak's going to try and prorogue Parliament, Weezy again? No. He won't be proroguing Parliament. He will just not. So what happens is, when Parliament goes off for recess, it's not for a set period of time. It goes off for recess indefinitely, and then the government bring it back. Now, if a majority of MPs demanded that Parliament return, they are superior to the government. So, they can basically tell the king to bring it back. In reality, they go through the Speaker first. So, let's say a majority of MPs was against this. Because you might think back to 2019, you're thinking Boris Johnson prorogue Parliament. You might think, so why didn't Boris Johnson just not bring Parliament back after summer when he was Prime Minister? Because the majority of MPs then were not on his side and they would have just demanded it come back. That's not the case now. So Rishi Sunak is not suspending it indefinitely. He's just going to say, let's not bother coming back for these 3 weeks. And you know why? The reason why will be over summer, the COVID inquiry is already really spicy, right? It's going to get way more spicy because let me just check the exact day. I think it's the 13th. I hate Windows 11. I hate it. Yeah, I think it's a week today. I think next Tuesday, the COVID inquiry begins its public hearings. Public hearings means taking witness statements in public. And we're going to get that all over summer. So over summer, we are going to be having lots of people involved during the government's pandemic handling, giving evidence to the inquiry in public. There's going to be a lot of interesting things come out. And you would think that opposition MPs are going to want to ask Rishi Sunak some questions. Now, they'll get a few weeks, but then it'll be summer recess. And a lot of the spicy stuff might not come out until that summer recess. So they'll be waiting for Parliament to come back in September. So Sunak obviously does not... Imagine the scenario, right? Parliament comes back for 3 weeks. Keir Starmer, there'll be lots of opposition MPs, but Keir Starmer is the one who's going to be able to have the most questions. He will be hammering Sunak on all the revelations that have come out. And it could look quite bad for him. And then Sunak has to go into the party conference season. No, he can't be dealing with that. So Rishi Sunak is basically trying to hide until the party conference is really crucial. It'll be the last conference before the general election. In theory, it doesn't have to be. Someone alluded earlier. In theory, there could be a general election in January 2025. That's not going to happen, though. Even in terms of the Tories' plans, maybe just after next year's conferences, but probably not. I still think summer's most likely. All right, let's go to some general questions then. So there's one here about the Labour mayor not being able to stand again. Yes. For those who don't know. So first of all, what I will say is whenever anything like this happens, I haven't checked every single one, but every time I've checked, why would Labour do that? It always transpires that the Labour candidate or politician in question has publicly opposed the Labour Party. And I keep saying, I'll say it again and again and again. No one has a right to stand for the Labour Party. No one. I don't care how long you've been. You can have been an MP with, 30 years experience. You don't have a right to be the candidate at the next election either. Doesn't matter who you are. If you do not support the Labour Party, go and be an independent. However, this particular candidate is not just someone who has publicly undermined the Labour Party. He's essentially an anti-Semite. Should we put it that way? Without going into too many details. And in fact, and this was really crucial, he was interviewed after the decision was made that he won't be able to stand as Labour's candidate. And the journalist put to him all the ways in which he'd essentially been a bit of a Holocaust denier, right? And this journalist put to him a question and gave him the opportunity to make his position clear about the Holocaust, right? And he wouldn't do it. Now, anyone who knows anything about what Labour's been through in the last few years knows that Labour should not really accept anyone as a candidate who is involved in any form of bigotry at all. But it should be obvious, given the damage that specifically anti-Semitism did to the Labour Party, the Labour Party cannot afford to have even a tenuous link with anyone who is credibly accused of anti-Semitism. And when I say credibly accused, I mean there are actually records of them. That is the reason why that particular mayor is not allowed to stand as a Labour candidate. That is like the clearest cut case of, yeah. And this guy should not be a Labour candidate. It would be ruinous to the Labour Party. This person standing as a candidate for the Labour Party, you imagine what the Daily Mail would do with that. He would destroy Labour's chances of lots of seats. He would cost the Labour Party lots of seats at the next election. But anyway, that's that one. What's happening with the Privileges Committee? Is that done and dusted? No, because they haven't announced their result yet. Oh, it should be this month. Now, in theory, until we get the nod that they've decided they're about to reveal their report, we don't know. But we are expecting this month. But bear in mind, that's they haven't said anything yet. Until they've said something, in theory, it could still take till after summer. It won't go on through summer. Remember, it's a select committee of MPs, so it doesn't sit during recess. But it's supposed to be this month. Years ago, you got fed up with Windows and switched to Linux. I don't do that, though. I'm too much of an ignoramus when it comes to technology. You say Windows 11 works well as long as you're relatively up to date and throw enough horsepower at it. My computer is an absolute beast, a proper beast, and it's very up to date. No, Windows 11 is sorry. If I were to compare this computer with the one I've actually just given to Graham, this computer performs more poorly, and yet the computer has better specs, way better specs. It's Windows 11 doing it. That is the thing that's dragging it down. But anyway, is this the same mayor that Navarra Media into it? Almost certainly, because all the other anti-Semites have been backing him. But there we go. I said that in Mayfield. Yeah, I can't help it if the Privileges Committee keeps taking ages. Remember, Parliament asked the Privileges Committee to investigate last April. Now, not all of the delays have been the Privileges Committee delaying it. It's been, I mean, they haven't been responsible at all. It's been difficulty in getting hold of information. Bear in mind, the thing that will have delayed it again is these diaries coming to light of Boris Johnson's parties at Chequers and Downing Street. So the Privileges Committee, even though it had nothing, I don't know why they even showed an interest. It had nothing to do with it. They're not investigating Partygate. They're investigating his lies in Parliament. But anyway, for whatever reason, they asked him to comment on them. So they'll have had to wait for his response for that. So I don't know. I don't know. On this one here, so going back to the anti-Semitism thing, I think support for Palestine and concerns about Israel politics often become conflated with anti-Semitic elements, and many are happy to let that happen. I don't know which way round you mean it, but it's the anti-Semites who are happy for that to happen. Because when you say, no, you're bashing Jews, no, I'm just attacking Israel's politics. It's like, but you're attacking Jews in Britain. How's that got anything to do with Israel or Palestine? But anyway. But I'll not keep going on about it because it's just one of those things. The situation is that really this simple. The Labour leadership can decide the criteria for selecting Labour candidates. Really that simple. Jeremy Corbyn was allowed to do it. If Jeremy Corbyn was allowed to do it, why isn't Keir Starmer allowed to do it? At the end of the day, you need candidates that support the Labour leadership. That's it. No one has a right to be a Labour candidate. No one has a right to be a Labour politician. It's really that simple. In that case, I'd check my drives up to date. I always check those things. But there we go. There's any number of individuals on both sides of this who will conflate the two for their own purposes. I ignore all of them. It's really that simple. But there we go. I'm just getting a lot of comments trying to advise me on my computer problems. I will manage, do not worry. At some point, it will all settle down, or I will smash the computer up and get another one. But there we go. Anyway, we've sort of come to the end. We're sort of finishing off on like Windows 11 tech advice. But there we go. Thank you very much for coming on. If you've enjoyed it, click the like button, or click the like button anyway. Just do it. It's only a click. Subscribe to the channel and check out the description below if you want to join the Patreon. Have a good morning, have a good day, and until next time, I'll see you later.